My name is Chloe, and I wish I could tell you that the story I'm about to share begins with love at first sight, ends with happily ever after, and has all the magical moments in between. But life isn't a fairy tale, and my story is one that veered off into dark, unexpected corners. I met Mark during a networking event for startup founders. He was suave, articulate, and ambitious, or so he made it seem. We quickly hit it off, and before long, he proposed. I was hesitant at first, but eventually said yes, thinking that maybe this time love would conquer all. Plus, my son Ethan liked him, which meant a lot to me. Our engagement was short, filled with the whirlwind preparations that any wedding demands. That's when I met Gloria, Mark's mother. She had an air of regality, her nose always tilted upwards as if she were perpetually smelling something foul. From our first meeting, her disdain for me was palpable. So, the fateful day arrived. I was standing behind the curtain, moments away from walking down the aisle. My heart was pounding, not with excitement, but trepidation. "Are you ready, Mom?" Ethan looked up at me, his little tuxedo making him look more grown up than he was. "Yes, sweetheart, let's do this." I smiled down at him, but my nerves were a tangled mess. As I stepped onto the aisle, my eyes skimmed through the crowd. And next to him was Gloria, in a dress almost as white as mine, glaring holes through me. As I walked closer to what should have been the beginning of my happily ever after I heard Gloria lean toward Mark and whisper just loud enough for those around her to hear, "You sure you're doing the right thing, Mark? She doesn't look like our kind." I felt a stab in my gut, and I stumbled slightly. A guest reached out as if to catch me, but I regained my balance and took another step. Mark looked at his mother, then at me, and his eyes briefly met mine. For a moment, I thought he would say something, stand up for me, for us, but he simply turned his gaze away as if avoiding the scene would make it disappear. It took all my strength not to break down right there. With a forced smile, I reached the altar and stood next to Mark. "Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the minister asked. "Is everything okay, Chloe? You seem distressed," he whispered, sensing my hesitance. "Yes," I finally managed to say, glaring at Mark and Gloria for a split second. And with those two words, I sealed my fate, entangling myself in a web of deceit and emotional torture that would take years to unravel. I had no way of knowing then just how rotten the foundations of my new marriage would be. But life has a way of coming full circle, and as you'll soon see, Gloria and Mark underestimated me, one time too many. After the ceremony that had more thorns than roses, Mark and I moved into my house. I had a small yet promising startup company that I was fiercely passionate about. We were not yet rolling in the big bucks, but we were stable and growing, and that was enough for me. Mark was in between jobs, a phase that seemed to stretch indefinitely. While I worked long hours trying to keep my company afloat, he was supposedly hunting for a job, although it was hard to tell given his laid-back demeanor. But if the cracks in our marriage were not already glaring enough, the frequent visits from Gloria turned them into gaping fissures. The first time she came over post wedding, she walked into my house like she owned it, critically assessing everything from the decor to the cleanliness. "So this is where you live," she began, making it sound like we resided in a rat-infested dump. "Yes, welcome," I said, forcing a smile. "I don't see any family pictures of Mark," she continued, ignoring my greeting. "Actually, I was thinking of taking new ones. Of all of us together," I replied, hoping to ease her into the idea of accepting me as family. "Ah, well, photographs can make anything look good, can't they?" she said, raising an eyebrow. Mark, who was standing by the doorway, gave a slight chuckle. It was the first time I had seen him laugh in weeks, and it was at my expense. It was at that moment I knew, deep down, that I was alone in this marriage. A week later, Gloria visited again, this time arriving just as I was preparing dinner. What's that smell?" she said as she entered, scrunching her nose. "I'm making lasagna. It's Ethan's favorite," I answered defensively. "Ah, lasagna! The refuge of the unimaginative cook," she quipped, again looking toward Mark for approval. "Come on, Mom, let's not start," Mark finally spoke up, but his words lacked conviction, and he avoided eye contact with me. "If you don't set the bar too high, you'll never be disappointed, I suppose," Gloria shrugged, taking a seat at the dining table as if it were her throne. Ethan sensed the tension and retreated to his room, casting me a worried glance as he left. I caught his eye and tried to offer a reassuring smile, but inside I was seething. It was becoming painfully obvious that my marriage wasn't just a union between me and Mark. It was an alliance with his overbearing mother and his passive compliance to her emotional tyranny. In every corner of my own home, I began to feel like a stranger. The taunts, the mockery, the glaring emotional abuse. It was as if I had to prove my worth for a seat at my own dinner table. And Mark, he watched it all unfold like a spectator, never lifting a finger, never saying a word in my defense. The emotional erosion was slow but incessant. Each of Gloria's visits wore away a little more of my self-esteem, my confidence, and my hope that Mark and I could ever be truly happy. And all the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that they both believed I was the lucky one, the one who had married up, the one who should be grateful. They say the home is where the heart is. But in my own home, my heart was under siege, my spirit was wilting, and the walls felt like they were closing in. I realized I had to do something, anything, to reclaim my space, my family, and my life. But little did I know, the real battle was yet to come. Time went on, but the situation didn't improve. 2 years had passed since Mark and I exchanged vows, and while my business was beginning to show signs of serious growth, my marriage was floundering in stagnant waters. Mark's job hunt had turned into a perpetual saga of excuses and delays. He started spending more time out of the house, his absences becoming longer and his explanations vaguer. It was on one of these late nights that I noticed a disturbing change in his behavior. Mark stumbled through the door, reeking of alcohol, his eyes bloodshot. Ethan was already asleep, and for that, I was grateful. "Where'd he been?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Out," was all he said, brushing past me toward the bedroom. "Out where? Mark, we need to talk. This can't go on," I persisted. "We'll talk later," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes and collapsing onto the bed. But later never seemed to come. Mark grew more distant, more aloof, as if he was slowly retreating into a shell only he could inhabit. The drinking worsened, and now he was not only physically, but emotionally absent as well. His increasingly frequent episodes were like a fog settling over our lives, making everything unclear, uncertain, unsteady. Gloria's visits continued unabated, each one a fresh assault on my self-worth. But what broke me more was Mark's complicit silence. It was as if he'd made his choice, standing firmly in his mother's corner. "Chloe, dear, I see Mark is not home again. It must be tough managing everything on your own," Gloria said on one of her infamous visits, her words oozing faux concern. "I managed just fine," I shot back, refusing to let her see that her barbs had found their mark. "I'm sure you do. After all, you're used to handling things on your own, aren't you? What with your first marriage and all?" she smirked. Mark, who was sober that day, but as disengaged as ever, sat in the living room pretending to be engrossed in a magazine. "Mark, aren't you going to say anything?" "Why? Mom's just speaking her mind. Can't fault her for that," he said without looking up, his voice tinged with a bitterness I'd never heard before. That was the moment I knew. Any remaining hope that our marriage could be salvaged shattered in the face of his blatant apathy and the toxic environment Gloria had nurtured between us. It was clear I was fighting this battle alone. I retreated into my work, my only sanctuary from the chaos that had become my home life. It was around this time something extraordinary happened. My company landed a monumental deal, propelling us to a $20 million turnover. A wave of vindication washed over me. Here was something real, something I had built from the ground up, proof that I was more than the sum of the disparaging words flung at me. Excited, I told Mark about it, expecting a lukewarm reaction, but hoping for a semblance of enthusiasm or pride. What I got was something else entirely. A strange excitement, disproportionate to any emotion he'd shown in years. "I knew marrying you was a smart choice," he said, a greedy gleam overtaking his eyes. It was then that I felt the first pricklings of suspicion, the early whispers of a warning that something was terribly wrong. And as events would soon unfold, those whispers would turn into deafening alarms. Mark's newfound enthusiasm for my financial success seemed oddly insincere. For a man who had long been aloof, treating our marriage like a roommate arrangement, his abrupt switch was jarring. I'd seen him more animated over a football game than during any of our serious conversations. So, his eager plans to invest and grow the wealth had me uneasy. Think about it, Chloe. With this kind of money, we could do so much. Maybe even retire early, he said, leaning in as if the money had rekindled a spark between us. But isn't that my choice to make? It's my company, after all, I responded, wary of his sudden interest. Of course, of course. But we're a team, aren't we? His eyes didn't meet mine. Before I could navigate this odd transformation any further, Gloria announced another of her visits, this time with an uncharacteristic cheerfulness that rang every alarm bell in my head. She arrived carrying a bottle of wine, something she'd never done before. I thought we should celebrate. A toast to Chloe's wonderful achievement, she declared, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. I appreciate the gesture, I said cautiously. It's unusual, but appreciated. Ah, well, we're all full of surprises, aren't we? She replied, winking at Mark, who grinned back. Ethan, my ever-observant son, sensed the strange air. As Gloria proceeded to pour the wine into the glasses, Ethan tugged on my sleeve. Mom, I think Grandma put something in your glass, he whispered, his little eyes filled with concern. Thank you, baby, I whispered back. Can you go and ask Grandma to show you the pictures of her last vacation? Okay, Mom, he nodded, sensing the gravity of the situation. Gloria and Mark were momentarily distracted as they gushed over some photos. Seizing the moment, I switched my glass with Gloria's. We all sat down again, raising our glasses for a toast. Gloria led, to family and unexpected windfalls. As we took sips, I watched her intently. Sure enough, within minutes, her expression changed. She began to breathe heavily, clutching her chest, and then toppled off her chair onto the floor. Mark rushed to her side, his face filled with genuine concern for the first time in years. It's hard to enjoy the wine when it's laced with poison, isn't it? I said, staring down at them both. What have you done? Mark spat out. Me? I merely switched our glasses when I suspected you were up to no good, I replied coldly. Gloria, gasping for air, looked up at me with malicious eyes. You'll regret this. I've regretted many things, Gloria. But taking action today isn't one of them. You've made your bed, now lie in it. I'll be calling the police to report an attempt on my life. Mark looked at me, his eyes widening with the realization that his life was about to unravel. Chloe, let's talk about this. No more talking, Mark. You either leave quietly and we proceed with the divorce, or I report this and both of you face the consequences. I'd had enough. Years of silent suffering had armed me with a resolve of steel. It was time to break the shackles, regain my life, and protect my child. The tables had turned, and I was no longer the one on shaky ground. As the police sirens wailed in the distance, I knew that the road ahead would be tough. But for the first time in years, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. It was the end of a miserable chapter and the beginning of one where I would be the author of my destiny. The sirens drew closer, their wails slicing through the tense air of the room. Mark's face was a mask of disbelief, as though he couldn't comprehend how things had unraveled so quickly. Gloria, recovering from her initial shock, but still breathing heavily, glared at me as if I had committed an unforgivable sin. Do you understand the seriousness of your actions? I asked, looking from Mark to Gloria. You tried to poison me. This isn't just a family spat. This is a criminal offense. We can talk this out, Mark pleaded. We don't have to involve the authorities. You had 2 years to talk things out, Mark. That ship has sailed, I shot back, my voice tinged with bitterness and finality. Gloria, seeming to regain her strength, now chimed in. You're making a big mistake, Chloe. Deserve this! He deserves far worse, I retorted. But I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this for justice, for myself, and for Ethan. He deserves a better life than to be caught in this twisted web you two have spun. The door burst open, and 2 police officers walked in, assessing the situation. We received a call about an attempted poisoning? Yes, officers, that's correct, I confirmed. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Gloria tried to interject, but one of the officers held up a hand to silence her. We'll need to collect evidence and take statements, he announced, proceeding to bag the wine glasses and bottle. As they conducted their initial investigation, my eyes met Ethan's. He looked worried but also relieved, as if he knew things were about to change for the better. Days turned into weeks, and the evidence against Gloria was damning. The toxicology report confirmed the presence of a substance in her wine glass capable of causing severe harm or death. It was the same glass she had intended for me. During the court proceedings, Mark finally showed a flicker of conscience. It was my mother's plan, he admitted in a hushed courtroom. But I let it happen. I let her fill Chloe's glass. The judge looked at him sternly. And you think that absolves you? Being a passive participant in an attempted murder makes you equally culpable. In the end, the gavel came down hard on both of them. Gloria was sentenced to 5 years in prison, while Mark, due to his admission and lack of direct involvement, was given a hefty fine and a restraining order. Before we finalized this divorce, I told him outside the courtroom, "You need to understand that from here on out, you are to have no contact with Ethan or me. You'll pay the alimony and child support as mandated by the court, and that's the end of our dealings." Mark nodded, his face etched with regret and loss. But it was too late for second chances. The damage had been done, the trust irrevocably broken. As I walked away, papers in hand, I felt a cathartic release wash over me. I was free, free from the mockery, free from the mockery, free from the subjugation, and most importantly, free from the constant dread that had shrouded my life. I had fought back and reclaimed my narrative, showing my son that no amount of bullying or betrayal should ever be tolerated. It was time to turn the page and start a new chapter, one where the protagonist finally takes control of her destiny. I had battled the dragons and emerged victorious, ready to live my life on my own terms. It wasn't a happy ending in the traditional sense, but it was a just one, and sometimes justice is the best form of closure one can hope for. With the court proceedings over and the divorce papers finalized, I felt like I was emerging from a tunnel into the light. There was a newfound space around me, devoid of the oppression and constant tension I'd experienced for so long. Yet, despite the relief, I couldn't shake off a nagging question. How had I allowed myself to be subjugated and belittled for years? The answer lay not in external circumstances, but within me. I needed to reckon with my own vulnerabilities, the weaknesses that had made me susceptible to such mistreatment. I sat down with Ethan, who had been my rock throughout this ordeal, for an open and earnest conversation. "Ethan, do you know why Mommy had to go through all this?" I asked him, trying to put a complicated matter into terms a 6-year-old could understand. "Because Grandma and Dad were mean," he offered, his innocent eyes searching for confirmation. "Yes, but it's also because Mommy didn't stand up for herself earlier. And that's something you should learn from. Never let anyone make you feel small, okay?" He nodded, his young mind absorbing the lesson. "I won't, Mommy!" Weeks rolled into months, and my business continued to grow. With Gloria in prison and Mark out of our lives, I could focus entirely on my work and Ethan. The house felt lighter, happier, like it had been exorcised of malevolent spirits. Yet one day, a letter arrived. It was from Gloria, penned from her prison cell. Reading it, I could feel her vitriol seep through the paper. "You may have won this round, but life is long. You haven't seen the last of me." It was unsettling, to say the least. I considered ignoring it, but a stronger part of me resisted that urge. I decided it was time for a face-to-face confrontation to close this chapter once and for all. I visited the prison where Gloria was held, sitting across from her in the visiting room. "I got your letter," I began, locking eyes with her. She smirked. "Oh, it isn't. I still have years left in me, Chloe. Years to make you regret what you did." "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about me making you pay. It's about me reclaiming my life and dignity," I said calmly. "You think putting me behind bars gives you power? You're mistaken." "No, Gloria. The power came from standing up for myself, from breaking free of the chains you and Mark wrapped around me. Whether you're behind bars or not, I am free. I came here to tell you that your reign of terror is over. You no longer have a hold on me, or Ethan." A flicker of realization crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by defiance. "No, we won't. I'm not coming back here, and you're not going to be a part of our lives. This is goodbye, Gloria." As I walked out of that visiting room, I knew that I'd severed the last remaining tie to that painful past. This was my reckoning, both with the people who had wronged me and with my own past mistakes and weaknesses. For the first time in years, I was truly the master of my fate, the captain of my soul, and while the path ahead was uncertain, it was undeniably mine to walk. I returned home to Ethan, to my thriving business, and most importantly, to myself, a person transformed, not by circumstances, but by choices and newfound strength. There was no undoing the past, but there was the promise of a future built not on shaky grounds of deceit and manipulation, but on the solid foundation of self-respect and resilience. As for Gloria and Mark, they had become mere footnotes in my life story, cautionary tales serving as reminders of the perils of complacency and the importance of vigilance. But they no longer had starring roles, and they never would again. The stage was finally mine, and I had every intention of making the next act remarkable.